Welcome back. This is session 2 of our series, The Garden, the Tree of Life. What we ended off in session 1 was the fall of man and how he was put out of the garden and the way to the tree of life was closed. But then a couple of years later, Jesus comes to pay the price, to be the sacrifice, the skin, the blood atonement for the sin that God clearly showed right from the beginning. So let's go for the session 2. We start off in John 3 verse 16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. So everlasting life, meaning life without end, meaning to live forever, which is how we get back to the tree of life where they would have eaten of it and live forever. Now Jesus comes and he says, I have come. Why? To bring everlasting life, to restore this life without end, life of the tree of life. So you're starting to see this picture of Christ coming to fulfill, to restore back to the beginning. Now Matthew 21 verse 19, we find this very nice verse. It says, and seeing a fig tree by the road, he, Jesus, came to it and found nothing on it but leaves, and said to it, let no fruit grow on you ever again. Immediately the fig tree withered away. Now Mark 11 has the same story. It just quotes it a bit differently. It says in verse 14, let no one eat from you ever again. So Jesus comes to this fig tree where there's only leaves, referring to the leaves that Adam and Eve used in doing it their own way. The fig tree that represents us being dependent on ourselves, doing it our own way. And Jesus comes and he finds only leaves but no fruit. And he says, no one shall ever eat of your fruit again. No one will ever partake of this way, because now the fig tree withered away and died. So this fruit of the fig tree literally is connected back to the Garden of Eden with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The fruit that came from that tree that was even more present in people's lives, and we see it still today. But Jesus came to show us something new, to change the whole situation. And he said, this fig tree way, this your way of doing things, I have come to fulfill this sign and completely destroy this tree, and it immediately withered away and died. So this fruit, or this product that is produced from this tree, we partake of this product in ourselves, of this fruit, and this seed, this fruit then bears fruit in our lives. And what this literally means is, as we do something happens. If you go somewhere, you walk from point A to point B, you are at point B. So the work you did, something had happened, and the fruit you now have of your labor is that you are now at point B. There's always something that is produced, that is happened, that is an outcome of something that you did. So now, the same thing with this. The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is the opposite of the tree of life, we can clearly pick up in Romans 6 verse 21. It says, these fruit of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, where we depend on ourselves, this way of life, the fruit of this leads to death. We find this in many places. The fruit of sin is always death. Jesus, or God himself, in the Garden of Eve, in the Garden of Eden, told Adam, when you eat of this fruit, you will surely die. And we see this in people's lives, even in my own, still today. As we continue to eat of this tree, we bear fruit that leads to death. But so wonderful, great is the love of God that he sent his Son, John 3:16, to restore to life our lives that have so been engulfed with this fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So that's why I said we have good news, we have hope. Let's see where we go. The human nature, as we eat of this tree, our own human nature comes to the front. We are in our core, and this speaks of all people. I don't care where you're from or what you do. All people in their core are immoral, impure, and selfish by nature. We literally need God. The whole story started off with the two trees of the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That tree of the knowledge of good and evil has no life in it. Life is with the other tree. We cannot experience life by dependence on ourselves. We need God in our lives to be God. So let's put this in a different way. It's like when people are born, we are small babies. Have you ever seen a baby cry in the worst circumstances? Just as you enter church, or you're in a small quiet place, or someone is trying to say something, and there's this one child that just keeps on screaming and screaming and screaming no matter what you do. That child does not care who's around him, what's going on. I am hungry, I am thirsty, I am tired, therefore I scream. This is the whole concept behind the human nature, where we are so dependent on ourselves and living for ourselves. This is so evident in small babies, and it continues through our whole lives. This same thing happens when we get older. For example, let's say you want to start a mechanic workshop at your house. That's a wonderful profession. It's also a wonderful way to get an income for you to provide for your family. So it always seems good to start a mechanical workshop at your house. The thing is, you think it's a good thing. I can guarantee your neighbor would probably not think that way. He would only see the increase in traffic and the noise that will escalate with him being living next to this mechanical shop. So in that same scenario, what's good for the one is not always good for the other. So if we live for ourselves and for our own good, what we do, what could be good for us, is not necessarily good. And that's where we get to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil for us versus the tree of life, where we depend on God. So it's always been part of human nature. And every person, in varying degrees, we always live for ourselves. Whether in some people it's obvious, in other people not that obvious, but I can guarantee you, in all people, including myself, there are so many places where we completely live for ourselves. And this is exactly what Adam and Eve did when they went for that fig tree, and they took the leaves and they tried to cover themselves without going to God with their issues. But God knew better. God knew that simply covering the sins is not going to eradicate the situation in the human nature. What is required for this is blood had to be shed. So he made the skin, that tunic, and he clothed them after blood was shed, because blood was needed for the atonement of sins. And God knew that even the blood of bulls and goats was temporary. Something had to be done. He knew the blood of Christ had to be shed to completely fulfill this and eradicate sin from the lives of people. We find this so evidently in Hebrews 10 from verse 4. I read verse 4. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats could take away sins. In this you can see that a sin offering of blood of bulls and goats had to be done yearly. They had to come back and do it again and again, because even though it worked, it did not last. But then Jesus came, and we find this in verse 5, just the next verse. Therefore, when Jesus came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you, God, did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. And then verse 6, in burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, you had no pleasure. Just this part is so radical. God takes no pleasure in sacrifices. It's not about us trying to do something or trying to earn God's heart or trying to work for our salvation by our works. We should depend on Him. It's about His work and what He did. John 3:16. He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, dying on the cross for the atonement of sin. It's not about us doing something. It's not about us sacrificing and trying to be good Christians and trying to be something else and sacrifice our thoughts, our hearts, our beings for God, even though that seems good. It clearly states God has no pleasure in sacrifices and offerings. That was not the purpose. Even though sacrifices and offerings was needed, it was required, God had no pleasure in that. That's why He sent His Son. He sent His Son to do the work once for all. Let's go on. Christianity. This is absolutely powerful. Christianity is not about what you can do for God, but what God did for you. He did the work. He paid the price. So verse 7 we see, Then I said, Behold, I have come. In the volume of the book it is written of me to do your will, O God. Jesus says, the volume of the book speaks of me. It's been the same story from the beginning, and the whole Bible speaks of Jesus Christ. Verse 8. Previously saying, sacrifice and offerings, burnt offerings and offerings for sin you did not desire, nor had pleasure in them, which are offered according to the law. Then he said, Behold, I have come, I, Jesus, have come to do your will, O God. He takes away the first, that he may establish the second. Jesus brings an end to the sacrifice under the law, to the sacrifice and the offerings which brought no delight, no pleasure to God. He brought an end to that. How? How did He do to establish the second? What second? Verse 10. By that will we have been sanctified. Listen to this. We have been sanctified. It's already done. We have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. And so, Jesus dying on the cross, shedding His blood, becoming the blood atoning sacrifice for us, He became the final sacrifice once for all. So God sent His Son. Why? To remove the fig tree leafy side of us trying to do it ourselves, us trying to cover sin, us trying to be better, to cover our shame, guilt and condemnation, and to establish the second way, the second order, and to remove the first, to establish the second. What second? The blood, the skin side, to atone for sins once for all. Now you've heard this, or probably I have heard this many times. For example, Romans 13 verse 14, where it says, clothe yourself with Christ, or to be clothed with righteousness. We see this in Isaiah 61 verse 10. I will greatly rejoice in the Lord, my soul. I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My soul will exult in my God, for He has clothed me with the garments of salvation. You see this? He has clothed me with the garments of salvation. He has covered me with a robe of righteousness. Oh my Lord. As a bridegroom decks himself with a garland, and a bride adorns herself with her jewels. So Jesus became God's blood, sin atonement for sin. And we who accept this sacrifice, we literally receive Christ and we put on Christ. We receive His righteousness, His sanctification, the blood-bought right to become children of God. And we put on Christ. We put on the robe of righteousness. We literally receive Him, the price that was paid and the fulfillment thereof. The price is paid for all. Absolutely, the price was once for all, paid for all people. I say this again. The price that Jesus Christ paid on the cross was once for all people. The thing is, not all people receive the gift. Not all people receive this sacrifice from God. But we who receive it put on the skin. We receive the blood sacrifice, and we are clothed with Christ. If this sounds a bit strange or this sounds a bit weird, I just point you back to a series we did recently about forgiveness to the world. So go and check this out. I will even put a link in the description of this video. So go ahead and check this out. The price was paid for all, but not all receive the price. So if it all revolves around Jesus Christ and what he did, we better start looking at what he said and what he actually accomplished. And this we will look at session 3.